Welcome back to another episode of Green Disruptors, Scaling the Future, where we spotlight the innovators transforming our climate future. Today I'm speaking with Robin Stopford, the CEO of PowerVault, a UK-based energy storage company pioneering smarter home energy solutions. With a background in engineering and decades of experience scaling industrial businesses, Robin stepped into PowerVault to tackle one of the biggest challenges in residential energy: how to make battery storage not only smarter, but also more accessible and scalable. We dive into how PowerVault is combining hardware and AI-driven software to optimize household energy use, cut electricity bills, and help build a decentralized grid, all while making the process seamless for the everyday consumer. So enjoy this conversation with Robin. All right. Hi, Robin. Welcome to Green Disruptors.
Hi, Megan. Thanks so much for asking me.
Yeah, and you're so kind to come at the end of a long Monday, so extra points to you there.
Well, thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah. Well, tell us a little bit about who you are, first of all, and then we're going to talk about PowerVault.
So I'm the CEO of PowerVault, and I'll come back to that in a minute. I guess my background is engineering. I'm a mechanical engineer by trade. Grew up building big coal-fired power stations in the early 90s. Then spent time as a management consultant in probably the last 20 years in big industrial companies, looking after their strategy, doing a lot of transactions, buying and selling, partnering companies, and in many ways helping small parts of those companies grow and thrive in a large corporate environment. I stepped out of that corporate world about 2 years ago, really because I wanted to move into a smaller business where I could have a big impact and focus on sort of a climate tech business. I reached out to my network, talked to a few friends, and PowerVault came up as one of the businesses to look at. So I spent time getting to know them and really thinking about the challenge ahead of us. And PowerVault is interesting. It's a business that has been around for goodness about 12 years now. Was a real pioneer in the space of energy storage behind the meter. So everyone has a meter coming into their house or to their office, and this sits behind the meter as opposed to grid scale in the fields or sort of on the power side. And it started with the idea of, as people were starting to put solar panels on their roofs. This is just here in the UK, which obviously is where I'm from. If you can't tell by my accent. So it's taking the energy off the solar panels that were being installed in about sort of 2010, 2011, and storing it locally as opposed to just putting it back in the grid with a sense that will have some value and in time actually have some real impact on the grid. I would say the guys who really had that vision were ahead of their time. And they started with lead acid batteries that they concocted and sort of packaged up into something that was really changing the way people thought about local storage. Obviously, the world has moved on. Lithium ion has come in. It's been packaged. A lot of it now comes from East Asia, and we as a business have evolved in that period to indeed embrace that. But I guess when I came into the business, we'd been running for about 10 years. Still hadn't really grown. And my challenge was to see if we could scale it and if it was a business worth scaling.
So who were they targeting kind of for those 10 years? Was it mostly residential people with solar, or was it tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, and so almost entirely domestic. And I guess small businesses who are putting up pretty small scale solar. And of course, the challenge in that market is huge in that it's fiddly. Every site is different. It's one where you don't get easy copy paste repeat. You have to deal with a lot of different people, and we had a model where actually we were doing our own installation, in part because the product was quite difficult. It was effectively assembled in a factory here in the UK. So we took component pieces and would assemble it and then assemble it in the factory to make sure it works, and then take it off to customers' houses.
So you're really limited to the number you can have just by how many employees you can retain consistently.
If you're going to grow, you need to employ more people. It becomes a really hard challenge to grow. And of course, the world was changing underneath the business's feet, and inevitably the product was really too expensive. So the challenge was, could we make something that was going to be competitive? And I guess that comes back to what's the point of the company? Because actually, if you start becoming that cost uncompetitive, what's the point? Do you need to exist? Do you have a purpose? If you just disappear, that's also fine, right? That may be a perfectly logical outcome because the world moves on.
Yeah.
But I guess the business was all about helping people transform the way they use energy, and that message of how do you, as a consumer, think about technology and the role that has in using less energy, or learning how much energy you use and should you use
Yeah.
less energy.
Well, I smiled when you said that because the answer probably in the beginning is they don't think about it at all, right?
Well, absolutely. And I think
Yeah.
it's one of those things that, of course, you just turn on the switch and you expect it to be there. Turn on your AC and you want to be comfortable at 15 degrees C, and you don't even think about what that means to everything else.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I think the truism here, of course, is if you start forcing people to change their behaviors and compromise their lifestyle, they're going to just say no, and they'll fight against it, and they'll say, actually, the thing why you're telling us this is all wrong, and climate change clearly doesn't exist because actually we don't want to change what we're doing.
And
If
plus, we
instead,
don't like you now.
well, and exactly, you can go down that road too.
Yeah.
But I think there's a natural sort of reaction to being
Yeah.
told to do something that you don't want to do, and I think the way you have to then think about it is, well, how do you use technology to enable that change, to allow people to embrace that opportunity or that understanding of what's going on. And as they dive into it more, then more people will start thinking, well, if I do something differently, then I can see a different outcome. And it's not about saving the planet. It's not about cutting carbon. It's more about how do I save my bills and how do I make my life easier. And I think that's where technology has a really interesting role. And so I saw this PowerVault business as an opportunity to really think about that and really to help a key little business grow in that space. And because in addition to just making batteries, we developed an algorithm that looked at the way the customer uses energy and looks at the local weather and looks at the tariff they're on, and therefore builds a sort of a cycling forecast for the next 24, 36 hours and does it every day. And this seemed like quite a sensible thing to do, but at the time we didn't know how much impact it had.
Yeah.
We just thought it was better than the alternative, but didn't know by how much. So obviously one of the things we did before, actually almost sort of as I was joining or before I joined, was is there real value in this, and does it have an impact? And I think even at this sort of the early version we have had that has only been operating for 2 or 3 years, it still improves the performance of the battery by 40% to one where you're scheduling with a decent.
Just because it's planning ahead of time when to store according to like usage and what it's going to need, and is that right?
Yeah, and it's also because actually in part of the world where you have seasons, and in those shoulder periods where the weather's really uncertain, and from one day to the next you'll have rain versus sunshine.
Yeah.
And if you're suddenly going to have a lot of rain, then you probably want to store a lot of cheap energy from overnight. But if you're going to have a lot of sunshine in the morning and you don't use much, then the algorithm will figure out, well, I don't need to pay for the cheap electricity because I'm going to get a dose of free electricity during the next day that I won't even use until fully charge the battery. So that's really how it thinks about it. And it's a bit of machine learning that we've evolved, and we're continuing to think about how to make it better. But it's in many ways that algorithm is a way of people starting to engage, and they think about, well, I see how it's working. Could I do better than that? Could I schedule my time better? And you start seeing some of that engagement of competing with an algorithm, which is a kind of an interesting concept. And you can see the thread that then draws people in of, well, if you start doing other things with it and you show them how much you could have saved if you had a slightly better version, or if you define what does perfect hindsight look like and how much could you have, so you get to the perfect state, then you can start figuring out how do you reduce that gap and what are the behaviors that can change, as well as well, if you did these three things, you'd be using less electricity and it would save you this much because you've probably got something on your screen that tells you how much you've saved anyway versus what you had before. So all of those
Yeah.
things start just getting people to think about it a bit more. And then, of course, you can start connecting it with your car, your EV, or your heat pump if you have one of those. And you start thinking, well, if I'm optimizing for my heat pump so that just have a fixed temperature, well, what's going to happen with the weather and how hot or cold I want it inside the house? And can I start managing my electricity usage to match that as opposed to as opposed to working my heat pump harder, and suddenly the
Yeah.
conversion to power will go from 2.8 to 4 because you're just running it at a constant power. Or if you then think about, well, how do I start thinking about where my EV is going to be relative to my fixed charging cycle, and is there a pattern that it can see, or there are some choices that I can make in the sort of behavior I'm going to have with it, and that may start optimizing my electricity consumption as well. And,
You
and,
can totally see why an algorithm would be very helpful. Like if I was trying to map this all out on my own, I'd probably just give up. So
Well, exactly, and or you have five different bits of kit with seven different apps sitting on your phone. You're thinking, well, do they really
yeah.
communicate with each other? And I don't actually know that whether they do or not. And so kind of where we want to get to is a place that you have one app, which connects it all and it optimizes it for you. So it sort of sits in the background and you can set your parameters and say, this is where I'd like to be.
Yeah.
Um,
From a psychology standpoint, my background was an educator, and so like the first thing you learn in school for that is that people will become invested in something when they have ownership or autonomy over it. So it's like giving them the ability to kind of self-regulate and to play with the technology themselves. I could see how that makes a big difference.
yeah, no, it's we certainly see the sort of the mix of the early adopters who are very, very keen, and but actually I think as it goes more towards mass market, people are interested for 2 weeks, and then they're really not. Actually, they just want to know it's working, and back to your point of they haven't thought about electricity in the first place. As long as they know it's saving them money, what we do then see is people start talking to their friends and saying, I used to spend however many $1,000 on my electricity, and I now spend this, and it's because of this, and you then suddenly have this is how my app works, and look at all the different things it's doing, and so there's an element of the sort of the interest and engagement on that side too.
Yeah, that makes sense. So with this new, it's more the software and the algorithm and the technology connected to the batteries that's really enabling you to set yourself apart. What's kind of the next step in getting this to a place where you can scale?
Well, yeah, I think that the challenge we have is we are still a battery business, and that's where we're rooted there. And at the moment our software sits alongside it. It's always an interesting question when you've got a hybrid hardware software business. Lots of people sort of shy away from that.
Yeah.
I think in a world of sort of Internet of Things, in fact, having that innate hardware understanding is really quite important to enable you to make the firmware and software work seamlessly. Um, if you can have that knowledge, live knowledge, without actually owning some of the assets, that's a great place to be. That's often a really hard place to get
Yeah.
to. And of course, our starting point was at the hardware. So that's very much kind of where we are. So we're making a I guess a sort of a shift in that we're scaling up our operation on the battery side. So we stepped away from manufacturing everything ourselves. We import batteries and inverters from the Far East. We package them up in our own sort of form factor. We have what we call a smart bridge in the middle, which is really a controlling unit that sits outside the skin of this all-in-one unit, but within the stack physically, and that provides extra layers of safety. It provides extra sort of communication security, and actually gets everything up to the cloud. So we have a little computer inside. It's got a couple of meters. So suddenly you're getting sort of cloud communication where the algorithm then sort of effectively does its job, sends a signal back to the unit, and away you go. Um, that sort of process took about 50% of our cost out.
Wow.
It's a modular system, so it's easy to install. We changed it so you can put it in with new solar as well as existing solar. We've
Great.
set it up so that third-party installers can install it. So suddenly we've got kind of the rudimentary building blocks of a scalable model.
Yeah, I mean, that's a few really big barriers that you seem to have overcome.
Yeah.
So, I guess what's the next step? Are you considering going after more commercial projects, or are you going to stick mostly with residential? Like, I guess what do you see the next 6 months looking like as far as implementing those growth goals?
Well, I mean, the very natural thing to do is to step away from residential because it is complex. Um,
Yeah,
and if you're trying to scale a business properly, you go after your commercial industrial because actually it's going to be much simpler. That is an increasingly crowded space, and we live in the
yeah,
residential world. So in many ways, that's a market we know and understand. So we'll
yeah.
stay in the market we're in, but start scaling in a number of ways. So we are building out our sort of third-party installers. We've started small. As we get to understand them, as we build our credibility, we're now working with larger installers. We're starting to work with some house builders as they start thinking about putting in solar
Yeah.
together. With various policies that are coming through from the government, that's becoming easier and easier here in the UK. And I guess the cost of solar and storage has come down to a point where there are now a lot of big asset managers who are investing in social housing and big residential portfolios to put that on the roofs and in people's homes. And so suddenly there's a very interesting play there because not only are you more interested in local optimization, which we've proven we can provide, but you're also interested in the aggregation capability of taking all of these small units and making them into a virtual power plant, as it's called, where effectively you
Yep.
can take 10 kilowatt inverters from 1,000 homes, and suddenly you've got 10 megawatts. And you can scale that up and up and up, and suddenly you've got an awful lot of power sitting behind people's homes that can play a meaningful role in the grid. And that has a number of interesting dynamics for some pretty, I guess, fundamental reasons that every developed economy is facing, in that no one has really invested in their energy infrastructure for the last 25 years,
That's
30 years,
true.
40 years probably. I mean, I came out as an engineer out of university in 91. There weren't that many heavy voltage engineers coming out after the mid 90s, I would say, and we certainly saw there were no jobs for them in the UK because there were enough of them
Like we're
around.
done.
Yeah, exactly. And
Yeah.
there's now a shortage, and there's a shortage because the big power stations are all being decommissioned, and instead we're seeing a lot of wind turbines, both onshore and offshore, and a lot of solar panels, even here in the UK where it does the sun does shine occasionally.
Sometimes.
And I guess that the impact that has on the grid is, instead of having these big central units that provide the big power, you've got a whole mass of decentralized energy that has to be working in order to get power to people's homes, and it's in very different places. So that you end up in a situation where even at the best times, your grid infrastructure has to just adjust because it's not quite built as it's not functioning as it was built to do in 1960, 70, 80.
Right.
But then, of course, you've got days where there is no wind and it's dark, November evening, peak load, and you're short of power, and so you're dependent on the gas fire you have, gas or nuclear that you have left, or whatever you have in your battery storage for a period of time. And there's a price volatility curve, so that in those periods of time, obviously it's much more expensive,
Yep.
and that's where there's real pressure on the grid. And so as the demand for electricity grows, that peak is growing too. But if you're starting to store lots of power locally, actually you can defray the peak, and you can time shift it to either side of it. You can charge up overnight, so you can then use it during the day. You can also charge up during the middle of the day to then use in the peak period in the evening. And we've seen real examples where even at sort of local levels of sort of house builders, where they're looking for a connection charge that's massively expensive because the local infrastructure isn't good enough. But
Right.
if you can suddenly reduce the peak load, then actually the impact's going to be much less on the local infrastructure, and your costs will come down, and planning will be better and faster. So there are quite a few real advantages to putting in microgeneration to support the grid development,
Yeah.
and that's flowing
Yeah.
through in a whole, through the a number of demand side response markets that are just starting now. There's been some legislation here in the UK that allows that, and I know it works in a number of states in the US where you get exactly the same thing. Um, and so suddenly you've got a new market that is starting to build some efficiency into the way people are pricing. You don't have to get all of the benefit through your electricity company. Third parties who've got that aggregation capability can also put some tech and some insight into it, and also help change people's behaviors. And I think we're just starting down that journey,
Yeah.
but it's going to be fascinating to see how it evolves.
I agree. So what does it look like for you? I mean, there's obviously a lot of incentive for builders and a lot of other people to be adopting these just to solve the problems that they're having. But what is your outreach strategy like?
Well, and it's we're talking to an awful lot of people, and exploring a lot of different projects, and I think it's, at the same time we're busy developing the products to allow us to really play and the tech to allow us to play in that market. I think, but what it needs is some real cyber secure interoperability to connect these things together. And ultimately, you need to work with partners to make sure you're collaborating and finding the right use cases and the right problems with the right people who've got the vision, and work at it together. I think I have a really strong view that in any market like this that is evolving, there isn't going to be a silver bullet that solves it. It's much more about getting people who've got similar sort of challenges or objectives together to figure out how what they have is going to be helpful to create something at the end of it that really changes life.
Yeah,
And I think that's
I
very
think
much what we
that's
are.
I think that's broadly true. Like you have to build your offer around what the people you want to work with actually need, and there's going to be some changes along the way in the conversation and what your product is. So,
And you can't predict what the outcome is going to be, I don't think. It's about experimentation, and it's, kill quickly if it doesn't work. Um,
absolutely. That's the business you start is not the business you end up with. I don't know if you've heard that before, but
Guaranteed. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, are you to the point where you're running ads? Do you do like just a lot of organic content? What's the strategy there as a marketer speaking?
Well, we do. I mean, I suppose a little bit of everything. We run sort of ads on Meta, on Google. Um, we are starting to work with some influencers.
Oh
We've
yeah.
done, which is quite interesting. We have our first influencer putting in a unit in the next couple of days, which will be a
Nice.
change for us. So, and that's I suppose reaching the end market and consumers, because I think it's that that brand awareness is really important.
Yeah.
And PowerVault, despite the fact we've been around for 12 years, not everyone knows us, which is
Yeah.
shocking. And even though we're in the Science Museum here in London, again, not everyone knows that there's a PowerVault in the Science Museum. And I mean, so we need to tell people about these exciting things, so that the name
Yeah.
registers a bit more. But of course, then there's a whole, the B2B marketing is then about working with installers and helping them think about why would they want to install PowerVault, and how does the PowerVault messaging to the end consumers resonate with them, so that actually it's going to help them sell their product. So we sort of think about it as the marketing messages to consumers are all about being safe, whether
Yeah.
it's safe in terms of a product that's safe in your house. There are lots of people who are concerned about having lithium-ion batteries, and they see pictures of batteries from e-bikes blowing up and things like that. And of course, that's very different from an industrial battery. But nevertheless, you need to sort of make sure they
Yeah.
understand. So we have extra safety in our product. We need to help them understand that it's a safe choice to make in terms of financially, so that's part of what helping them think through about the returns that they're going to get and the savings they'll make, as well as through Smart Store actually that it's going to be a effectively safe so that they don't need to worry about it and they can sort of give them a peace of mind. And I guess for the installers, we always think about making it simple, making it easy.
Yeah.
They don't want to have to go back and revisit the site, so we sort of stand in the shoes of the warranty because we're local here in the UK. It needs to be easy to install, it needs to be easy to commission. All of those things need to be seamless so that you can just sort of pick it up and yes, you ought to have done the training, but occasionally some people will install something that they've bought through a wholesaler that they haven't been trained on, so you need to make it so that someone can pick it up and almost do it intuitively. All the instructions are really clear. So all of those things are making it simple and straightforward. Things we strive to do, and it takes time to get it better and better. But I think building all of those different pieces together is essential actually.
Absolutely.
And then you've got the kind of the partnering, which is around what are the other businesses trying to operate in this landscape where actually making sure that our products communicate with theirs also works, and that's are we sort of consistent in terms of our messaging and point of view, and I think all of that people talk about brand authenticity. That is always quite important, especially when you've got this sort of a market where people really are concerned about greenwashing or being taken advantage of, and there's a trust. I mean, you're asking people to spend
Absolutely
a lot of money or do things that they wouldn't have done otherwise, and I think you need to create a sense of real trust in what you do.
Yeah, I mean that's true in any business, but I could see how it's extra true in this one because it's a bigger investment and there's the safety factors and there's multiple touch points with the way that you're involved with the vendors and with the community. And so that leads me to maybe we could kind of wrap up with this question, but if you could solve maybe one problem in the next year, what would that be?
People solve one problem. Well, I guess ultimately what you really want to be able to do is get all these things connecting so you really understand how much you're paying and how much you're saving. I mean, I've talked about that's where we're trying to get to. And if you could do that through the value chain and you cut out the wastage, that would make a massive difference here. I think it's going to take a while because it's moving fast, but it'd be great to be able to do it. And I think let me broaden out my answer to that because I think I think it's actually what I really want is that I think of it as a telescope. There's a sort of getting the right energy generation, getting the right consumption, and in the middle you need a will of putting all the right pieces together to make that work effectively. And that is a political, it is a I suppose community aspiration to recognize that in order to get a future where there is enough power that is going to be stable for everybody, the whole network has to operate better and there isn't money to afford it, and so therefore actually they've got to think about how to put the pieces together sensibly, and that takes this is where government intervention is actually really important. It's not something that you can just let the market do because it will operate down all sorts of different alleys. But having someone,
as we see, yeah,
exactly, and I think that's. I mean, I'm not particularly in favour of interventionist governments at all, but this is an interesting environment.
It's different.
You need somebody who is really thinking through how do these different things put together, how should these things get put together, and therefore what are the right metrics and incentives to put in place to make that happen. And that doesn't happen yet, but it needs to.
Yeah. Well, if you think about it, I don't know if there's anything else that every single industry and every single piece of requiring so many moving parts to work together. I don't know if there's anything that's quite like that as far as climate challenges.
No, I mean, water has lots of the same element, but the complexity is I guess
I would bundle that in there. The water is totally related. But yeah. Well, I mean, it sounds like you're at a really interesting point. And so if you continue with your getting that authentic brand voice, and I see great things coming, and they're lucky to have you at the wheel right now.
Well, Megan, thank you. It's a very very interesting journey. Thank you um, for your thoughts and input. It's always useful to get reflections as we're sort of on this journey, and thinking about the challenges ahead, because it's never an easy road.
Yeah, for sure. And it's conversations that need to be had regardless of how much you know or don't know about the space. So thanks for educating me.
I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Okay, thanks so much. Well, thanks for listening to our conversation today with Robin with Power. If you're intrigued by the future of smart energy, residential battery storage, and how everyday households can play a role in stabilizing the grid, PowerVault is definitely a company to keep your eye on. For more episodes on climate innovation, clean tech, and sustainable breakthroughs, make sure to subscribe to Green Disruptors. This podcast is brought to you by Mountaintop Social Marketing. See you next time.